Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see you all again for what is the last of this series, I guess, of webinars that we've done over the last couple of months in conjunction with the training that we've been running that's been part funded by the Knowledge Transfer and Innovation Fund, the Scottish Government. So we're going a bit different tonight. I'm sure some of you have probably been through all the other webinars on whole farm plans and all the rest of it. Tonight's obviously is completely different, but we're delighted to have Phil Knott along with us. Phil's a crofter on Skye, who I'm sure some of you have met previously. And Phil's going to take us through a talk about establishing trees on Crofts. So the format tonight is Phil's got a presentation. He's going to run through the presentation. Those of you that pre-submitted questions, it might well be that they get picked up along the way. If not, we'll pick them up at the end. If anybody else sort of thinks of other questions as we go, if you can either hold on to them to the end or stick them in the chat so that you don't forget them, and then we'll pick them all up once Phil's finished. I think that is the plan. So you've heard enough from me already tonight, so I'm definitely going to shut up now, hand over to Phil, and yeah, take it away.
Thank you so much, Donna, and thank you so much for the invite. Really enjoyed the Crofting for the Future trainings that we've been out delivering, and the demand for this came from those trainings. Lots and lots of questions on trees and establishment. Grand, there we go. All right. Yeah, so I thought this is one webinar, and then I was saying to Donna Healy before, it's like, well, crikey, it's quite a lot to cover again. You feel like you can spend weeks and weeks covering this. So it'll be a whistle-stop tour. I've done a lot of resource pointing and signposting as we go, because every croft is different, of course. Every situation is different, and whatever you need your trees for whatever reason, is different as well, I expect, in many cases. This lovely oak here, I don't know if anyone's seen this one. This one's on Neudart. You often see hawthorns this shape, but I've not seen an oak quite like that before. We've got some down on slate as well. So I'm going to start by putting you off. I'm testing your resolve on trees straight away. I'm guessing you've got a desire for trees if you've thought about it. But why not trees in many cases? Very legitimate reasons for that. Particularly with grassland, quite extensive grassland, species-rich, herb-rich, fungi-rich grassland. Perhaps should not be considered as a site. We need to be protecting a lot of the grasslands that we've got. It can work a little bit side by side in kind of a silver pasture way, but on the whole, trees and these kind of habitats often don't go hand in hand. Same as with birds like lapwing. Ground nesting waders, they like open country, corncrakes to a point as well. So certain areas where it's just not suitable to be considering trees, and you need to really check the protected status of that as well, whether you've got there or not historically or present as well. Of course, historical sites, another reason that you probably have to keep clear of trees. Check on these kind of things as you go. Way leaves and services. Views, cultural views, open views as well, in some cases being protected like that. And of course, I think we're all kind of aware now of peatlands as they come. And so the rules on the depths of peat do seem to shift a little bit. I think it tends to be coming down on the whole in terms of the depth of peat that you wouldn't be allowed to formally plant into in terms of schemes and things like that. So often do depths of measurement. So if you've got common grazings or areas of peat and things, it will be worth considering the depth of that. As much as anything, it's a really marginal gain as well with a lot of these kind of plantings. If it's really quite deep peat, it's only if it's degraded that the trees will kind of be happy to start getting away. Ideally, it would be too wet and the trees would just be stunted. Trees will grow on peat bog, but they tend not to get away in many cases. So I'm still trying to put you off. Now, why are you planting your trees? It's an important question, really, because we often just put trees because it's a purposeful use for the croft. I think it's we can layer our reasonings. We doesn't have to be for one thing. I often hear biodiversity as one of the reasons, particularly for new entrants coming into it. It's like we want to plant for biodiversity. but it shouldn't be at the expense of other things. And I think some of the kickback against trees from many crofters, and rightly so, is it often takes up productive land, and if it's just afforested, if it's just planted up with no real thought to anything, and it's not necessarily seen as a productive use, you could say it's almost a waste of ground. And that is some of the arguments that you hear against trees. And I've heard some very, very strong views on trees shouted, yes, at crofting meetings before on that kind of basis. But I think integrating trees for the right reason, the right tree in the right place for the right reason, I think can have lots and lots of different benefits. But I really want to get from the very outset tonight of thinking about management and thinking about future planning. How big are those trees are going to get? How wide are they going to get? If you've got some lovely trees that you're planning for timber, how are you going to get them out? Are you sticking them in the middle of a wood that you're going to have to clear access routes through? So many thoughts. And even me now at 41 years of old, I know I'm putting trees in now that when they get up and away, I'm going to be 61 onwards. And so the next rotation round for that, it's you start thinking about, well, this is for the future as well. Yes, we can benefit from it in the short term, but it's also for the future. And trees grow. They keep growing without checking, and if they're doing well, then they keep growing and growing, particularly the conifers. There's only way is up. And so there's always the risk of them failing. There's big liabilities with that. And essentially, you're just going to be having to sort of a tree surgeon in 20 or 30 years' time, if or whoever takes on your croft. So bear those kind of thoughts in mind. Trees are absolutely in the right place for a lot of reasons, but not at the expense of kind of future liability. Ideally, we shouldn't necessarily be planting trees. The landscape should be rich enough that there should be seed sources for everything around, and trees will come in naturally as part of natural succession on the whole. In most of our land, there will be some level of woodland, either deciduous or coniferous woodland, that would kind of come in over time. And obviously our land management has dictated a lot of those things. Yes, there's areas that won't generate trees, where they're too high, too exposed, too boggy. But ideally, let nature decide, because nature will know what does best. But for that, you would need a good seed source and roots in of that. So some of the willows and the birches will blow in on the wind to a fair point. But things like rowan and hawthorn and rose, they'll get often dropped in by birds. We often see folk that kind of make a decision on trees 4 or 5 years after taking stock off, and that's a bit more of a challenge in some cases, because the grass is kind of got up at that point. You always think succession will take over, but I've seen areas of rush and Molinia that have had no stock on, that just have not succeeded in trees, even where the seed source is there. And that's just because there's no seed bed for it. There's no opportunities for those trees to get away, because the ground hasn't been disturbed. It's a key factor for a lot of these species, is that they need basically the bare ground to be bare at the right time of year. So if it's covered in moss and grass, you're going to struggle with that. So ideally, these decisions are made after stock removed, or it could be the case that stock goes back on to graze things down, to give it a chance to open up as well. So as a management thought. And you can have pigs or cattle as almost like a rolling barrage of ground disturbance as they go, but just a light touch. Because pigs in particular can really turn the ground over, which will also create a lot of ground for competitive weeds as well. So I think there's a bit of a trade-off for that. But yeah, you've all got to battle moss and rank vegetation with that. I think in many cases, if you are thinking of natural regeneration, you've got some good sources nearby. Just direct sow as well. Some of the things that maybe aren't quite so nearby, just push in some hazelnuts. I mean, look how many seeds are in that rose hip there. There's if you just scatter a few of those around in the autumn, holly berries, ivy berries, all these kind of things, you'd be amazed at what can come up after a few years as well. Because otherwise, you're just relying on birds and mice and things like that. And with things like acorns and hazelnuts, they don't move very far on the whole. We don't have squirrels here. We hardly have any jays on Skye. And so on the whole, it's just relying on things moving like 10, 15 meters a year at most. But if you're going to plant, then ideally get the right provenance. So this is the zone of provenance as it is across Scotland. And it makes kind of sense. It's arbitrary lines in a lot of cases. But if you're in Shetland, ideally you would be getting seed source from Shetland. Well, that's extremely limited in terms of what is available up there. Same as from Orkney 102. So I'm in Skye, so zone 104, which covers the Southern Hebrides as well. But then just over the bridge is Loch Alsh, and Noida is 105. So that's technically a different area. So ideally, especially for funded schemes and things as well, they will try and source from your zone. And if not, then your neighbouring zone. And as often as a shortage of supply in many cases because there's a limited number of tree nurseries. But it doesn't make sense on latitude in many cases. If I get trees in from Aberdeen, over here, the amount of rainfall, our ground conditions, our exposure conditions, even things like altitude, geology make a big difference. And if you're asking a lot of trees, and particularly quite difficult marginal ground, because we often ask on crofts, then you want them to be pretty tough and resilient. And so getting them in from nurseries on the East Coast may be fine. They may have the provenance for you, but also it could be unsuitable. I've seen many cases of like hawthorn, for example, being brought in en masse from down south. Sometimes it does absolutely fine. Sometimes it does not do well at all. So ideally source from up here, but often cost becomes a factor. But how much to replant and do the whole lot again because it's been wiped out. And for biodiversity as well, so the timing of these things, they often burst out quite early on if they're from down south, for example, and they're not suited for our kind of climate in terms of the timing as well. They just get shocked out. So if you are going to source them, try and get local. Think about the biosecurity things as well, because we do get overseas trees still into this country. I can't believe these kind of things, really, especially with ash dieback, but we get overseas trees that come in. And so if you're not asking the questions, then you can just get birch, you can get things like that, and it can come in. Ask how are they grown as well. If you're getting trees that you want to plant out on the west coast of Scotland, the north coast of Scotland, you want something that is pretty hardy and tough. And if it might look big and look great, and you've got a lovely 30-centimetre tree that's arrived, but if it's been kept under glass and fed fertilizer and sprayed with fungicide for its life, it's going to be in for a shock when it comes out. So it needs to have been hardened off, and ideally not grown too fast. We vote with our eyes, don't we, in terms of oh, that's a nice big healthy tree. It's not really what you're looking for. You're looking for something that's kind of healthy and resilient. Lots of small tree nurseries out there. I'll give you some resources and links for that. There's plenty more available and setting up all the time. Some of them croft based, which is fantastic use of a croft. But if you are using these small nurseries, please try and manage your expectations and wish lists as well, because you can come in with a lot of energy and say, oh, I want this is your shopping list, because you're so excited about trees, and we get that, but often us smaller suppliers will often struggle to be able to get the full list. So kind of look and see what's available, maybe shop around a little bit, but what ends up happening often is you end up going to a bigger nursery because they can tick all your right boxes. Just I'd say maybe think about how you shop for trees, and maybe do smaller batches at certain times, and go with what's available if at all possible. You've always got a wish list of things, but trees can come in after and then come in waves as well. I always say starting with a pioneer species, as you'll see throughout the presentation. A good list of the tree nursery directory is on the Reforesting Scotland hub. If you've not heard of Reforesting Scotland, do check out their website. So it's kind of it's something I'm a director of. So if you see it on the right hand side, there's a tree nursery directory with most of the small nurseries and big nurseries listed on there. Other than that, there's no other central resource for that. Loads of good threads and things in there as well about that, including woodland crofting. You've got myself and Al Whitworth on there as well. So you've got kind of a couple of woodland crofters straight in from the off. So for me, I think if I was doing a planting scheme on a bare land site with limited trees, I would be looking for small trees to go in first. Again, that's for kind of shock and adaptation. You don't want to be planting in anything that's too big. It's going to have to just adapt to the climate and then catch up. It's always better put something in small, let it find its feet, and then it'll cut its cloth accordingly in terms of how much it wants to go on. Yes, ideally locally sourced and appropriate provenance. And again, that kind of hardiness, I think, is quite important because big trees, whippy trees that have been grown with fertilizer, not always the best solution for that. And then you want to stick that tree where it is going to be happy. You don't kind of forcing it around really. So having a good understanding of what the needs of those trees are is an important factor. That's in terms of the soil pH to a point, but certainly the drainage aspect and the geology for that, and exposure as well, because the first trees in, if there's no other shelter, they are going to get a blast. So you might have a great design layout 2D from above, but the reality of it on the ground is that if you're sticking oaks and cherries in first, they're not going to be very happy. They want to come into kind of almost a low woodland situation. So maybe after a few years, you can maybe put them in at the same time, but on the whole, I think it needs kind of the ones to take the shock first, really, and to get up and away. Really, they need protected, completely protected for those early years as well. Nibbles are really, especially on the leader, the main tip of the stem is not fatal for the first time, but it will check the shape and cause it to bush out, and then it's just going to stand still for a little while, and then repeat on that is going to be problematic. And yeah, tended well for the first 5 years. This is something I see quite a lot. Is maybe that first year you're planting with enthusiasm. The first year you're looking after it well, and then years 2 years, 3 year, 4, you're kind of thinking a bit complacency. The tree is going to look after itself, and then often that's when some of the failures occur. You do need that extra care. So if you've got choice over your planting scheme, I would say kind of go smaller and do what you can manage and try and get a higher success rate away first, and then work on the next tranche after that. Often the case is that you want to get it all done early doors to get those trees up and away. That's fine, but do you have that time and commitment to do that? Because otherwise you'll be expecting losses within that. So many thoughts on this kind of thing, in terms of some of it's old school, some of it's new school. That picture's taken from the Woodlands Handbook. There's a kind of hand dug, in some cases, or machine dug mounding. These days, if there is any mounding to be done, especially for things like forestry grant scheme, is that they often do inverted mounding, where they'll scoop it out and then drop it back in the same hole. So it's kind of like brings the bottom soil to the top, essentially weed free in that environment. Before it used to be hinge mounded, and my site is hinge mounded, where they scoop it and then drop it to one side, and you plant on the spoil as it is. That's great for getting those trees away if they can survive the initial exposure, but also you just leave holes all over the croft. You think of access and future. And I'm 6'4", and I've fallen into holes in my croft that have been dug with a machine. It's not ideal. I have to go around filling them in as I go. So it wasn't really done with the thought for that. But the establishment rate was high, so it was a factor for that. Maybe in absence of management, a lot of these sites are done in a big forestry style way, where there's not herbicide used, or big scale ground things. But I think on crofts, if you're doing small scale, 300, 400, 500 tree plantings or so, then I think try and keep it as low key as possible, and as light touch as possible in the initial planting, and then just keep that gentle management in from the outset. Cutting of vegetation, I say ideally, if you're coming into a site that's just had stock taken off, that's ideal because vegetation's short, you can get around. If you're coming into something heathery or grassy, which has had little to no stock for a while, it's quite a challenge to get in and around there, and you've got to factor in the clearing of the vegetation as well, whether it's with brush cutter or like. And if it's Molinia clumps, the big tussocky grass, that's a really difficult thing to plant into, for kind of access as well as actual getting the trees in. If it's a small number of trees, maybe you could be cutting vegetation and dropping it where you're going to have it in piles where you can plant the trees. That helps to mulch in advance. You can then just come and part the vegetation and stick a tree in there. That's quite nice. And you then marked out where your trees are going to be. So it depends on numbers. It certainly works for things like orchards and smaller setups. But always with the planning, just think, well, how are we going to get these? If you're going to manage those trees, if you're going to looking for timber, how are you going to get them out? Are you going to get machines in here? Do you want a wood chipper in here? Do you want a quad in there? Do you want to get access through? How are these trees going to be, not just in their trunks, but also in their branches? And how's that going to interact with the infrastructure? Not just overground, but below ground as well, of course, and services, because they will seek out drainage, they will seek out service lines, all sorts of things, and septic tanks. And so just be really careful on those thoughts. There's loads of resources out on best ways of planting trees, but if you're getting trees in, if you get them over winter, just try and get them in as soon as. Don't really wait for any kind of time now. It's still a good time to be planting trees now. They're starting to wake up now, but they should be okay. And the modern switch is towards cell-grown trees, away from bare-rooted trees. So bare roots come with no soil, so it's just their roots, often in a bag. Also, real risk of drying out. Often they come in cells these days, and so they're in a little plug, which is pretty hardy, and they often plant throughout the year now, which is very different to the mindset was before, which is kind of November to March, and you're very strict on that. But no, it's a lot more free. But just as I see throughout this video, roots. Just do not let them dry out. Don't bring them into the house. Don't let airflow get to them, and check on them quite regularly. I wouldn't soak them in water. That's not an idea beyond a day. That's actually not good for trees in most cases. But dampen them, and then keep them dark and cool as best you can. So if you've got a shed or an outbuilding, that would be absolutely perfect. Just watch that airflow so you don't have them in the sun. And I often hear as well, people having, oh, it's a nice day for tree planting today. And it's like, well, that's a rainy day then, is it? Or a day with very little wind, because often you see it in bright days. Those chill days where it's kind of just above zero. It's beautiful spring or late winter weather. Really quite shocking for roots, and they can desiccate really quickly. So I would be mindful of that. Sun and wind as a combination, particularly cold, are often fatal at that stage. So don't go laying your trees out where they're going to be. I think I just go around and plant them as you go, and plant them at the right depth as well. I think that's a fairly obvious point, but often you'll see trees that have been planted too deep and it's kind of smothered the stem. Many trees will be okay with that, but many won't. And then often with the top roots exposed, and again, many trees will be fine with that, and many won't. So just look for that colour change, and you'll get a handle of where the best soil level is. And make sure you heal them in well as well. I've seen sites where things like crows have pulled trees out. Or are there other things that have done it? So make sure they're well in. In terms of feeding the trees and spraying and things like that, personally, I'm not one for that. I think let the trees establish themselves at their own pace. Let them find what nutrients they need. If they need more nutrients, they have to put down more roots and go out and seek this kind of stuff. So I think if you feed an area, they will often get accustomed to that level of fertility. Yes, they'll get a good initial boost, but they won't have cut their cloth accordingly. They will definitely be seeking that level of nutrition throughout. And if you're not going to keep that level of feed up, then they're in for a bit of a shock, and they often stand still at years 3 and 4, and that opens them up to things. So let them go at their own pace with their own fertility of the soil. You're choosing the site, so I'd say put the right tree in the right place, and it'll get away in its own time. So lots of the threats, I would say, are small. We're going to come on to the big ones in a minute. A lot of sites, like former forestry plantations and things, you often get infestations of weevils after that. So it depends if you've got that nearby. If you've had a felled plantation, all the stumps often get a big burst of weevils out, and then they, in turn, eat the roots of young trees as they come out. It's kind of an unnatural cycle, often created by the unnatural management of forests. Some sites are sprayed for that, but just be mindful of that. In most grassland sites, it's not a problem, not a significant problem anyway. Diseases and pathogens as well. I think, as much as anything, I wanted to highlight the fact that if you put all your eggs in one basket here, you might be in a bit of a pickle if you go on one tree species. We've had some horrible tree disease. Ash dieback is still ravaging us. Who knows what's next, really? Dutch elm disease obviously is coming back to a point in areas of Inverness. I saw it as bad last year. There's probably going to be another tree disease that's going to come in, unfortunately, especially with the way our biosecurity is in this country. So I think having a good, resilient mix of tree species is an important thing, but have good biosecurity as well. So sourcing locally, sourcing appropriately, I think is an important part of that. For killing trees, really, I think voles in long and rank grass can be one of the biggest things. They nibble and girdle. They often don't just because they're like a mini beaver. They are a rodent, but they will often just have a little chip away at the exposed stem, and then come back, and then go back in a few weeks' time and have another little nibble of that. I don't think they don't need to eat trees. I think they just take a little bit of nutrition from that bark and then leave it and then come back to it. So having voles is often quite difficult, especially in sites where stock has been removed and it's just then rank grasses all around it, because that is a network. If you get your hands down in amongst that, you'll find these networks of tunnels all the way through it. And it's really hard for the buzzards, the kestrels, the owls, whatever the avian predators are, and then ground predators as well. They've got this maze underneath this mat of grass, so they are safe. So generally, areas around trees, if they're nice and open, and a good mulch of an appropriate thing would help that. We'll cover that in just a bit. That puts them off as well. They don't like being out in the open, and so if they're on, say, wood chip mulch or something like that, then they won't be tempted to go near the trees as much, I think. And there's also vole guards as well. I'll look at those. And then grass. For the first few years, I think grass probably kills as many trees. It's that competitive zone. Until those roots are really out and away for a tree, until it's up and above as well, it's in the competitive zone of the grass. And in the first few years of ground disturbance after planting, often grasses come straight in and they're quite aggressive, and other weeds and other things as well. They will take a lot of the nutrients and water, but it's mostly nutrients. They just get outcompeted, and those trees will stand still at that time. The bigger ones, the bigger threats, we'll cover individual protections and things as they go. Depends where you are. So if you're on South Skye, you probably won't be seeing any rabbits or hares at all. Used to be, but hardly anything at all. I'm quite lucky, I would say, to have no rabbits. Really, it makes certainly having a tree nursery a bit easier, because they are nibblers. And there's parts of Skye where hares are more a problem. I certainly know other parts of say East Sutherland where it's probably going to be brown hares, be more of a difficulty. And you can have wonderful guards on those. And if you get a snow pile of a foot or 2 foot, then they'll just go on top of it and eat the trees above that. And I've seen that in quite a few places, unfortunately. That's a common thing. So do bear that in mind if you get snow drifts regularly where you are. Not such a problem here on Skye, but I know that some of you are further north and east and inland. Even poultry, to me, has been a threat. Depends on how rich the ground is and what else is available. But like geese can peel bark off. Hens, for me, have not been a problem with trees. They do scratch away the mulch and they do open that up. But I think on the whole, it's probably a net positive for my experience, but I'm happy to hear others. But geese, yeah, just watch them as well. They've got quite a broad diet and they can cause a lot of damage to trees. Livestock is fairly obvious. We'll cover individual protections on that for different heights and different things. Generally, livestock take a small amount of trees as part of their diet, but it's a significantly important part of in terms of their nutrition, and so they will be seeking it out, and they will go to extra effort to get that because it's nutritious bite and it's accessing minerals that they can't get from down below. Deer depends on your levels where you're at. For us on South Skye, red deer in particular are a problem, and it's very hard to get any trees away without actual deer fence or individual tree protection. And don't blame the deer at all. You know, they are just nourishing themselves. It's just often they're out on the hill, and then the best ground is the in-by croft ground, and you can't blame them for coming in. And my croft with well, probably about 30 species of tree on here must smell amazing over the hill. And you kind of, yeah, if they're out on the hill or winter, of course they want that. They're a woodland animal, and they need that. So it's getting that balance right in many cases. And another biggest threat is man. People in terms of strimmers. Goodness me, I've killed a few over the years. Even me being careful here, I'm certainly happy to hold my hands up and say I've gone through quite a few. You just lose track of where you are in terms of your paths and your orientation, and you just go straight through, or cause significant damage if not killing them by whipping around, girdling at the worst possible place on the tree to open it to fungal attack and disease. You know, right through 3/4, if not more, of the cambium, which is where most of the nutrients will go. So of individual trees, there's so many things out there. You know, when you drive up the Western Peripheral Route on Aberdeenshire, and or the A9, you just see these guards and tubes everywhere. It's not a sight I like to see, and I don't think it's an effective way of doing it. I think there's a lot of plastic pollution, and the upkeep of these things are really not great. Why are you using those guards? In many cases, that there will be a reason for doing it. But there should be, yeah, every tree guard that's used should have a good justification as to why it's there and what the mitigations against it. Those guards and stakes will often cost twice as much as the tree itself. My argument would maybe, why do you not plant more trees? In many cases, you know, we only get high success rates, but at what cost? In every sense. I'll cover cactus guards in just a second. It's quite a relatively new piece of kit, which I think may become more common in Scotland, particularly for those wanting to introduce individual trees into pasture. Or mini enclosures, maybe little clumps of trees, trying to get them away. Fencing is so expensive, isn't it? It's really challenging to fence a whole area, but you could do maybe small areas at a time, just using a few posts and some wire. But whenever we're doing things like this, please just make sure that you are thinking of the welfare of animals and things as well, making sure things are tight and well looked after. I've seen deer hung up in poorly maintained or assembled deer fences or electric fencing where they've got tangled. It's not nice, and so we need to be fair on these animals as well. So if we do things, best to do them properly. For those kind of expensive things, particularly cactus gardens and enclosures and things, I mean, ideally we need better financial support, I think, for that, because we're making an investment into our crofts that's going to be 10 years or so down the line where you're getting real benefits from it. That's quite a heavy investment and quite a lot of risk in terms of that. Not a big area of land necessarily, but quite a lot of time put into that. Currently, the agroforestry payments, which I'll highlight at the end, I don't think they're great, and I'd say the uptake level that Scottish Forestry have had have not been great either. But do take a look at Scottish Forestry page or search agroforestry, and you can make your mind up if it suits for you. It has to be integrated into a crop or a grazed area, so it can't just be for planting trees. It has to be for an area that is being grazed or cropped at the same time, and there's very strict rules on the density and spacing. And if you're protecting your trees, how are they going to be weeded and maintained? Because if you get them in some of these tubes here, you often get grasses in them, around them, through them. You got the so you've got Volgards there on the left. So they're kind of they're tubes. You can get eco-friendly biodegradable ones. I don't know the full merits of biodegradable status and how long it'll take, but better than certainly the plastic that we've got right now. Woodland Trust are switching to the eco ones where you can. You often see more of these mesh guards in the middle because it's not quite so hot and humid in there, because those traditional tubes, they're just like a mini greenhouse, and it causes the tree to go up and be very, very warm, very humid, quite sappy, not much support. So it's better to have the wind on it, let the airflow go through it, and it harden up that way. But with those meshes, they often do grow through it. So again, this needs maintenance. How long do you need that guard for? Why is that guard there? And try and stop things growing through it, because again, it'll just restrict it. And if you get plastic all the way around a trunk or a side branch, that can be a good source of infection getting in. Another biodegradable tree guard there on the right. So again, when you get to a height like that, you maybe think that's maybe for rabbits or so. A lot of the rabbit guards have been things like spirals and these plastic things, and they're brittle within a couple of years. I do not like them at all. They do a job, but yeah, it's just bits of plastic everywhere again. I'm not happy about that, especially if it just gets integrated into the ground. So these are kind of the smaller options. If you're going to use something like a bigger tube, then you've got to think, why am I using a bigger tube? Is it for stock? Because it's like, well, the sheep will knock tubes over, cattle will knock tubes over. If it's for red deer, it's like, well, the tallest tube's generally about 1.2 meters, and for red deer, that's a lunchbox height. That's just saying thank you very much for presenting this at my head height. You're only going to get nibbled in it, and the tree has got no way of branching out and bushing out, naturally defending itself. So I would avoid the big tubes unless you absolutely need it. Maybe for a woodland situation where you're trying to get it up and through individual trees, but other than that, it's got to be a case-by-case basis. You may not think you have voles as an issue now, but if you've got grass that's going to be ungrazed and unmanaged, it could well be an issue. And I would recommend vole guards as a basic thing almost anywhere, really. I think if that's one piece of advice I would say is vole guards would be useful. Doesn't need a stake necessarily, depends how windy it is, but you could just push it a little bit into the ground, and then just again maintenance as you're going through. It does add drag. All of these things add drags, so if it's really windy and exposed, you've got to think, how's that going to work? Cactus guards. This is the new one here, so you can see how spiky they are on the right, and that's put in with rebar, so reinforced bar for kind of construction. So that is to stop things like cattle and pigs knocking them over. So it depends on depth of soil. I think it's been well tested in lots of areas. Obviously, those are rich areas there. Are some of our crofts got deep enough soil to get rebar in? If not, you can use a couple of posts. But yeah, you would open up a little bit for that. And you often get these kind of mesh ones as well. Very expensive, really. It's about 40-50 pounds in terms of once your labour and everything's included in there, and you put a mat around it. But how do you weed in that? Unless you put that higher up, if you put that 6 inches higher up because of whatever you've got to contend with, how are you going to weed it and look after it? Not easy. Often you could clump plant in there, maybe put 2 or 3 other plants in there at the same time. And if you've got to put plastic mat in there, then please think about how you're going to take that away afterwards, because don't leave that in the ground. I've seen all sorts of things. This is kind of a typical one on the left. Again, it's post and railers and ryelock. It's pretty expensive stuff, I suppose, quite labour intensive, maybe for specimen trees. But if you're in a field, that's probably a decent option as any, really. It's open to the wind. That's not a problem, really. That's okay. Something like that on the right, which is obviously an IBC thing and a drum washed up. It's like, well, that catches a lot of wind as well. So I don't know if that would be fit for for Orkney or Shetland and the Western Isles, I think it might just get blown out, I think, unless you really put that through. You'd want to put a lot of holes in that kind of thing. Post and rail, I think, is as decent as any, but do factor in that weeding, that grass in there. It's going to be competitive. If you've done a really good mulch around it, you should be okay. This is from Helen O'Keefe. She very kindly sent me some of the pictures of her kind of homemade ones and some of the difficulties with that as well. You can see the exposure, lovely view of silver and things like that in the background. So nothing stopping coming in from a northwesterly, brutal winds as they come, and they do get bashed around in there. So do factor that as well. These trees getting whacked against that, and that's a source for disease. You can see that ash round tree on the right, quite badly damaged from that, and just tried to use I think bicycle inner tubes to try and keep it suspended in the middle. Once it's hardened up enough, it will get past that, and that tree will probably survive. But do think of that. Naturally, the trees will bush out a little bit. That's quite a nice way of doing it. But yeah, the lengths you often have to go to, it's expensive. There's no cheat sheets, I'm afraid, on that. If you're looking for a really quick solution on it, there's not easy, and everyone has their drawbacks. Aside from, of course, just completely fencing an area out, as we know, it can be very expensive. I had a question on fruit, and so I'm going to cover quickly on fruit. I grow a lot of fruit trees. People ask a question about pips versus grafting on that. So most fruit trees again will be grafted because that's a clone of the exact variety. So if you plant pips of your favorite fruit, you're going to get something a bit different. It may be excellent, it may not be. But however, grafted trees are a little bit weaker. It's Malus domestica, for example, for apples. It's not quite as hardy as, say, a wild crab apple. So you've got to pick the varieties right. You've got to pick the right type of fruit that grows here. The rootstock is important. Loads of information out on that in terms of the types of rootstock. So if you go and get your £7 trees from Aldi, they may work, but likely they're going to be on a dwarfing rootstock that's wholly inappropriate for crofting counties, and the variety is probably not going to be fit for us either. You may get lucky, but tell me in a few years how it's gone, because in many cases they struggle after a few years. Fruit needs shelter. And again, I'm going back to my thought on feeding of trees. I would say don't overfeed trees. Listen to the tree. That's my discovery tree there on the right. It's put on good annual growth. I can see that there's whippy stems that come out there. It's a healthy green colour, and that's barely fed, that tree, at all. So it's finding its own nutrients as it is. I give it a little top up now and again. If it had some discoloration, if it wasn't putting on much annual growth, if there was signs of stress in it, then it might be time to reach for the feed. But they're pretty good at seeking out in our ground here. Do you stake or do you not stake? Depends how you are. I generally buy putting younger trees and then don't stake them, or stake them after a year or two. If they're younger and smaller, they'll find their own feet accordingly, and then you could stake them if they start to have a bit of a lean on that. If you're staking it because it's so windy, you probably need more shelter. I've got to be honest with that. It's likely that the tree is going to be stressed and it's not going to be doing very well. Get some quick shelter belts in there, even just some cover with willow. I think that's probably one of the better approaches to get fruit trees up and away. Pruning, crikey, we can cover whole webinars on pruning, but for me, less is more. Focus on dead, diseased, dying of the tree. They need to photosynthesize. They do need lots of leaf cover, so you get lots of fantastic RHS advice on looking after fruit trees, but this is not Kent. You need these trees up and photosynthesizing, really important. Mulching is for me is key. Mulching is everything. I'm very lucky now that all the trees that we've got on the croft are now 20 years old, or the majority of them, and so we've got abundant wood chip available. So I invested in a wood chipper. It's my most expensive piece of capital kit that I've bought here, but that produces tons and tons of this wonderful material, which will turn into compost as well. And this is hardwood wood chip. This is from like willows and hazels and things like that. So not the other kind of softwood wood chip, which would be okay to a point, but think of that, it's often coming from Sitka spruce and pine, full of lots of resins and things. Maybe good for certain bits, but generally it's an acidifying thing in the first few years, but will act as a mulch. So many things I've seen used as mulch. Of course, fleece seems to be very popular now. Fleece is good if you can get it, and it doesn't matter if it's daggy. That's great. You don't have to worry about being presented nicely. It's a nice thing to have extra nutrition for that. And if you're using man-made things, carpet, make sure it's a wool carpet. Very hard to kind of get hold of, really. or if you're using membranes, then fine, but think about the management plan for that. Please don't leave them into the grass. It's horrible plastic stuff. It also gets caught up in machinery, as well as just being eaten up into the soil over time. Not nice. Yeah, you can be creative with that. Use cardboard or whatever as well. But grass mulch, cut grass, bracken. I use bracken. Seaweed to a point, but just think about, is it going to be weedy after that as well? And things like seaweed often have quite a few weeds in there. And as it rots down, it's just going to create a seed bed for rather competitive weeds. So things like wood chip is pretty good, because if you do get weeds through it, you can just pull them out quite lightly. As well as that, it marks where the tree is. I put trees in here. So this is a fruit tree I planted just a couple of weeks ago. And the stake there for me is just a marker once the grass gets up, because you think, oh, how can you see? Everything's flat and easy. Trust me, when it gets up to a foot, 2 foot in the summer, you can easily go through it. And if you're going out with a mower or strimmer or whatever, you never know, you might have a mistake. Mulch can be good for voles to hide in as well. So ideally is something that they're not going to get underneath. Some of those plastic sheeting ground covers, voles can often get underneath there. I've pulled many up before and found vole nests underneath. So they've been there for a reason, but it's nice and cozy as well, especially the black membrane. They quite like that. For me, staking, I think is because if the tree's going in small, you shouldn't need a stake in many cases. It should be fine. Maybe after a few years you can correct it. So that stake I put in there for my fruit tree on the right, I could take that out and then drive that in, probably diagonally, maybe 45 degrees, and then stake it higher up on that tree, so having another year of growth if it's starting to get pronounced lean. If the center of gravity is quite a way over, then you might want to think about correcting that in its early years. It kind of lignifies in years 2 or 3. If you can try and get it at that point there, if it starts to shift over, it's very hard to correct, apart from with pruning. Again, just think about weeding in all of these things as well. How are you going to weed around it? Because you will need to manage that grass. I don't recommend herbicide personally. I don't like using many chemicals, but that's something that people will use at times. But that grass in that field on the right there will be competitive with those trees. So I would like to see mulch around those ideally, but that's a lot of time, that's a lot of labour, could be a lot of expense, depends on where you get it sourced from, but it would make the world of difference. If you put hens in there after, as you, I don't know, I should have got some pictures from my place. They just kick it all over the place in day one. They love it, but you then have to go and rake it back in again. You have an endless battle with them. So this is an orchard I planted just down in slate. The grass is going to be very well managed. No staking, and just vole guards went on onto these. So very, very simple. That it seems a bit bare. You think you want to be doing a lot more than that in terms of infrastructure? No, it's like let the trees get on with it, in my opinion. Right, there's so many trees to cover. I want to focus on 3, or 3 families at least, of pioneer species. Ones I think that if you haven't got trees now, you should probably focus on these first, and then the other ones can come afterwards. So all of them are pioneer species. So pioneers are kind of colonizing bare ground, or very good at taking over ground that doesn't have trees in. That's quite important, because our crofts, particularly a lot of areas, have been pasture for a long period of time or been managed for other things and crops. There's none of the mycorrhizal, there's none of the fungal associations of trees, and so they're going in and having to adapt. So if you're putting in a woodland plant, it's going to not be so happy. If you're putting in a plant that is happy to go into new ground, you've got a much better chance of getting them away. Things like alder are fantastic because they're also nitrogen fixer as well, so it improves the ground. It's basically a rush killer, as I see it. But over 10 years or so, you'll see the rushes just disappear underneath them, because it's fixing the problems of compaction as well as feeding the soil. Lots of different types of alder out there. Native just works fine though, so if you can get locally sourced native common alder, that's great. But in places like Shetland, things like Sitka alder, which is from kind of Alaska and the Aleutian Islands, things like that, is more of a shrubby one. Has the same nitrogen fixing purposes, but also will get away quite quick. With alder, you hear all the time, they're like wet ground alder. So the 2 associations together, because they're often in fluvial areas or wetland areas. They like flushed ground on the whole. They like nutrients. So they're not a bog species. So bogs, peat bogs, and those kind of marginal areas are boggy, very, very acidic, not much in the way of running water. They're not happy in these situations. They like rushy ground in terms of our best ground, and then fluvial stuff. And they will go like stink if they're happy. but don't expect miracles if the ground is really poor. They've got to seek those nutrients out themselves. It'll take a lot longer. The richer the ground, the quicker they will grow. And they're both elastic and brittle, which doesn't make a huge amount of sense. But the trees bend massively, but when it comes down to stress and strains, they will just snap away. You can walk up to one and snap a branch that's thumb thickness with a simple movement in your hand. Yet it can take 100-mile-an-hour winds. So a great tree for shelter belts. Birch is my go anywhere tree, particularly in the worst ground. So if you've got really bad ground, birch will be the one tree you want to get in. But downy birch, not silver birch. Silver birch is more of an East Coast thing. It is a tough tree species as well, but downy birch is the West Coast one, better suited to wetter conditions. Really high biodiversity, and for me, it changes the ground. It makes the ground better for the next tree, and again, really elastic as it comes. Willows is a topic in itself. Goodness me, there's 35 odd native species plus however many cultivars of different things that have been brought in. So you often see willows just lumped as, oh, well, it's wet, stick into willows, or it's a shelter belt. Let's just do a line of willows. It's like, well, what willow? Always go native if you get first chance. Goat grey eared as they are. It's mostly eared willow you see in the Highlands as a scrubby thing, but goat willow is a good standalone tree. Gets a very big age and a very big girth. Grey willow is somewhere in between of that. And then I often hear, my partner's a basket maker, and you often get people wanting to put basket willows in, thinking they'll be suitable for it. It's like, well, they're from Central and Eastern Europe in many cases. They like richer ground. They are not the go-to species for this. And all our basketry willow on our croft is not on wet ground, it's on good ground, because they want the free draining sites. They will struggle in wet ground in many cases. You want some of the more native willows. There's so many different varieties out there, but Alaskan felt leaf willow is a good one, again, for kind of really exposed places. Hooker's willow, Shetland Amenity Trust has been doing well for sourcing these things. It's quite hard to get hold of a lot of them. Some of the white willow variants, there's Salix alba, Vitellina, which is that golden willow, that lovely orangey one you'll see in many places. That just does really well. But what I often see is this kind of willow, Osier willow, Salix viminalis, and that's kind of a standard shelter belt base. That's not a shelter belt there. It's like, and if you're just propagating from that, you're just going to get the same again. That'll do fine if it's like a 10 by 10 square. That'll be really dense, but on a single line, especially for protecting infrastructure, that doesn't do much at all. It doesn't look great. It gets really desiccated as well. So that is not an appropriate willow because it needs cut every few years to maintain its shape, and then you're having to cut your thing down, or you leave it as it is and it just gets really whippy and doesn't really provide the function. So don't just take what you got from neighbours. Do a bit of research as well. See what's doing really well and see what's ideally a tree rather than a shrub. How we do for time? I'm doing okay for time. Hedgerows. I mean, it's not really a Scottish thing. It's not really a crofting thing at all. With more of stone dikes and other kind of earthen dikes and things down there. But down south, hedges have been used for millennia, but particularly since the Middle Ages for keeping things apart. Mostly dominated by pretty horrible, gnarly things to keep people out, but also to keep stock in or stock out of areas. So high percentage of hawthorn and blackthorn, which need management as well. So they're not a long-term solution if you don't want to get your hands dirty or prickled as well. They will eventually hollow out underneath. They'll probably need laid or coppiced at some stage. Just factor in the management of all of these things. This is my croft on the right, and we put in a more hedges scheme with the Woodland Trust at the very bottom here. Put it through membrane. This is plastic, which needs cut out. There are biodegradable membranes and things through that. But for me, the survival rate was so high with that, I felt it justified that plastic use. Of course, that's in landfill now, but at that time, I thought it was worthwhile. But yeah, if you can seek out biodegradable stuff that will last a few years to get those trees away, that would be great. It will still need management within that, but factor in the design. I think if you don't need it to be stock proof, and of course with strain wire fencing, we've kind of negated the need for a lot of the really gnarly stuff. Why don't you just go with something a bit easier to work with and play with? So willows and hazels in particular is really great. You can still stick them in really densely, and eventually you'll get some nuts out of it. And really nice, easy to work with wood, good for a range of things. But anything can hedge. Alders, willows, birch, they can all hedge quite nicely. You know, they all take a trimming, and they'll all be easy to shape. But to think about the ultimate height, with a hawthorn and blackthorn, you're only going to get up to a few meters. Generally, kind of best to do it in a zigzag pattern rather than a single line, and then 5 per meter or so. So that dense, if you want a real kind of good hedge, you'll need that. So people often dot them out every meter thinking they'll fill in. It's like, well, if a tree's got all the light it needs and is getting blasted by the wind and is exposed, it's just going to fairly stand still and just fill out very slowly. It's not in a competitive race. You stick 5 in a meter, their roots are going to touch and the branches are going to touch very quickly, and they know the only way they're going to survive is they go up. So that's true of many bits of planting, is just get them in at high density. But that's a cost, you know, how much per tree per meter, you've got to factor that in. I had a question on wet ground, and again, so I'm going back to the older thing here. So what is wet ground? It's like there's so many things. That area on the right on my croft is rushy ground, that is seasonally wet, but it's flushed ground, so there's lots of nutrients that run through that. So I put alder in there and some other species. It's not a bog. And some areas by the side of the streams will be incredibly rich, and you'll get all sorts of things colonizing in that. So work out exactly what it is on that. If it's on a slope or if it's quite rushy, then factor that in. But do get the tree species right for that. And in many cases, this wet ground is not because of the geology; it's because the ground is fairly compacted, often through kind of previous livestock management. The roots are not penetrating anymore, and it's often a pan, even just a few inches down. If it's wet like this, picture on the right there, stick a spade in it and see if it's wet all the way down, or is it just trapped on the surface? In which case the roots will eventually get through the right things, maybe do a bit of forking with that. Is it worth getting drainage in? Well, potentially, but in many cases you're bringing in a mini digger to do that kind of work, which is just compacting the soil even more with the lines of the drainage. So I would say work with hand tools locally if you can, but of course some of you are dealing with much bigger sites where that's just not practical. And then be mindful of peat. Ideally, we shouldn't be planting in peat at all. It's not any way good for carbon release. Certainly in the first 30 or 40 years, it seems that it's a net loss of carbon as the peat oxidizes and starts to break down. But maybe in the longer term it will be. What's the purpose of putting it into peat here with your situation, I suppose, is the question. If you want free trees, two things like willow beds, and this is great because you can just do cutting after cutting after cutting. So this is one of the more competitive willows. Just get meters and meters of this, which you can just chop down into cuttings. So if you get the right types of willows and things like hybrid poplar as well. Basically, if you see a tree in your landscape that's doing well, with permission, see if you can get cuttings from it, particularly the willows and poplars. Thinking of South Skye, the majority of the big trees in Breckish, for example, are hybrid poplar. So they do really well, and some of the more hybrid willows. So not necessarily a native thing, but it does well. And if it can get up and away first, let that be the sacrificial stuff. Get it in for free. You know, cuttings are free in most cases. You can buy them in as well, but start your own cutting bed. So maybe set aside half of them for your future source, because one of these will put on, well, in the right conditions, these will put on about 10 feet of growth a year, and so that can turn into 30 cuttings from one rod alone. So easy to multiply. And this is how I've always started with. It's just fish box tree nursery, just brilliant. There's the same 2 fish boxes there, planted up with acorns, child labour included for that, which is fantastic. And then I've got 200 odd oak trees out of that with minimal work. So very easy to do. Just got to protect them from mice and things like that. You can do the same with hazelnuts. You can do the same with brown berries. You can do the same with hawthorn. You can do it right outside your back door. So great way of doing it. Shelter belts, this is an important one. I'll just cover this for 5 minutes or so. There's so many resources out there on shelter belts, but generally there's the rules of 8, which is the height of the shelter belt. You'll get a very, very dramatic reduction of the wind speed, up to 8 times from the height of it. So the shelter belt is 4 meters, then you're at 32 meters of significant wind reduction, and 30 times generally is there's some level of reduction. So over a 4 meter, it could be as much as 120. There'll be a slight reduction of wind, slight reduction. As with hedging, pack the trees in as many as you can. Make the shelter belt as long as you can, wider as you can. if you're in nests and you've got a 10-meter wide croft, really hard. I'm sorry. And no, it's so difficult. I'm talking about 10 meters and 5 meter things in places here. If you've got line for one line of trees, okay, that's what you've got. Make them count, pack them in, I would say. And porosity, so the airflow through it, is not a bad thing. If you think of Sitka spruce and those kind of things, they're great for blocking the airflow out, but they create a wall. As we'll see in the next illustrations, that's not always a good thing. That creates big shocks and eddies in the system. And you think, well, shelter belts maybe just on your downward windward side, but no, put it on the leeward side as well. Put as many in as you can because it lifts the wind up. And of course, it's often the easterly winds, those cold winds, which are bad for lambing and for horticulture and things like that. And you're not often protected as much against those. If you can get shelter belts all the way around, it would pay you back handsomely. You might need a midge net in the summer, though, just as a warning, if it's too still. And really, you need to protect it for like at least 10 years and watch out the hollowing out. And I'll show you some bits of this. So, bottom picture, something like Sitka spruce or conifers, very, very good wind block for those few meters immediately downwind of it. But those eddies are really damaging over the top. And if you've got infrastructure, things like polytunnels, it actually could be counterproductive. It really crushes down and causes some nasty little turbulence. A bit more of a porosity in the top picture there. Great reduction in wind, a lot of airflow through it, and not so much over the top and down. So you want to kind of lift that wind up. And if you had a shelter belt on the very right of the image as well, then it wouldn't even be coming down at all. It would be lifting almost right over the top. So you can factor that in. And then try and layer it as best you can, because all trees grow up and all trees tend to hollow out underneath. That's the natural thing, is to go up. So think about how you're going to factor that in. And ideally have smaller shrubs on the both sides of it to make kind of a simple low hump. And with me at my croft, I've got enough of a tree shelter belt that I can now manage the ones in between. You can see I've been cutting and pollinating those ones in between. That will now regrow up, and then I can then think about managing the trees behind that, because they're getting up and away. There has to be a thought as to an exit strategy, I suppose, for that. I want to use these trees. I want to turn it to wood chip and firewood. I want to maintain them as a living structure, but I'm going to be managing them so I can have a changing every 5 years without losing the shelter. So that's ideal if you can have 2 or 3 layers of trees within that and then have a plan for that. And then around the outside of all my croft is a hedgerow. And so that's always there, always adding 2 meters of protection. Hollowing out. This is kind of classic hollowing out, where animals are let in afterwards. Great for the animals, of course, but in a short-term gain, because that wind can now get all the way through, because they're going to eat all the way up. For that, all the smaller shrubs have been knackered, and so that wind will now rattle through there. So the shelter belt is compromised in many ways. And then how are you going to manage that? You won't be able to plant back into that. Financial thoughts. Not as great as I'd like them to be. I don't know where we'll go with carbon biodiversity trading in terms of establishing trees. I'm staying out of that personally for now. I don't know where it's at, but something to consider. But again, where are those trees going to come from? What are the provenance? Is good biosecurity and all those kind of factors as well. And often things like the forestry grant schemes, also official government schemes, they'll be looking for high densities and high success rates. So very, very strict rules on that, and it often be giving over most of your croft if it's in by to plant. Maybe for apportionment it might be a different case, or a bit on the commons, but for in by they probably want a large chunk of trees planted up, and so it's not easy to do a planned system for productive side. I mentioned agroforestry as a word, so you can say silver pasture is another word for things like that. Agroforestry, integrating trees into kind of a farm landscape. Very, very, yeah, a lot of good rhetoric on this. There's a lot of good markers down in England and Ireland as to the way things are going. I suspect that will be the case up here. I'm hearing the word a lot more, but the payment is currently not flexible enough. But make your own mind up on it. Do have a look if you've got stock and you want to get trees in there. I think it's worth investigating. Depends on the cost of things as it is, but right now I think the uptake level has been low, but do factor it. Many of you would have heard of the Woodland Trust. You'll probably go on the Woodland Trust website and you can find the greater Woodland Trust from down south, and they'll send you free tree packs and things like that, and you think that's it. But no, you need to search the Croft Woodland Project. Some fantastic advisors for the crofting counties, Iona and Gordon, Viv and people like that. I'm sure many of you have worked with. Great for more hedges, so that's 100-meter hedges or upwards, linking habitats in many cases, and then more woods. So I think a minimum of 0.1 hectare, 300 trees or so. So really packing them into that, but really supportive, and they'll give you free, no obligation visits as well, and do a weed report for you. So worth investigating as well if you're going to do a larger scale planting. They will fund out to about 60% or so. But that would include guards and things like that. But you will have to look out for the main protection. So fencing is not included as part of that. You would have to factor that in. And if you've got red deer, it's probably not going to go ahead. That'll be picked up on the survey because it would be a real risk to the majority of the trees. Through CAGs, there are options of shelter belts. So do look through the CAGs regulations on that and see how it can be supportive for you. But again, anything with those there's rules and regs as to how it's done. And rightly so in many cases. Maybe it's not flexible enough, but do look at it and give it a thought before putting a shelter belt in. Do look at the CAGs options, even if it's for some of the fencing. But as I say, with all things, if the options don't work for you, just tell someone about it. Just say, and I'll point at Donna here as well. Say, poor Donna and Celia are going to get loads of messages on this. But essentially, if things aren't working for you, or you've made a decision not to do something, it's worth saying and say, I would like to plant trees, but I don't think this works for me. Or tell Scottish Forestry that the agroforestry scheme is not good enough. All these things I think are important to feed back in if we've got barriers for many of our crofts. Resources. So fantastic resources out there, and many of the pictures I've used from the site have been from the Highlands and Islands Woodlands handbook, so the Bernard Planterose one, really good handbook. I've got my copy here, signed by Bernard Planterose himself. There you go. But really good, loads of case studies in there, and basically everything I've covered as well. So you haven't got that, get it. I think it's a very good. If you're a member, I think it's 15 and £20 for non-members. Really worth doing. And then there's the Managing Small Woodlands book as well. More of a small booklet there on the left-hand side. Definitely factoring those in. Resources. I've just signpost for this. Maybe take a picture of the screen if you want to have a look at some more of these bits and pieces. But firstly, there's free advice for new entrants out there. So Farm Advisory Service mentoring scheme, which I always champion, is if you're a new entrant and you've registered your business, you've got your BRN in the last 5 years, eligible for 4 days of mentoring, which is brilliant because you can get anyone in on any topic. And you can go visit their place, they can come and visit your place. Great to see. Specialist advice, again, you look on the website under rural payments as well for that, but you can get quite a large amount of money to cover woodland plans and things like that as well. So it's out there. It's often undersubscribed because people don't know about it, but search it, specialist advice, and you'll see you might be eligible for stuff. Integrating Trees Network, which I'm involved with, is the Scottish Government, Scottish Forestry's thing about getting trees into the landscapes, about integrating. So it is designed for farmers and crofters, and there's good case studies in there, which with real life examples, which I think are really great, particularly for exposed locations or challenging environments. And it's warts and all as well, all the problems that we've all had when it comes to establishing trees. If you're interested in agroforestry, I'll look at the Soil Association and Soil Association Scotland. They've run the agroforestry show for the last couple of years. If you're in Argyll, there's Argyll Conservation Trust, I think ACT is what it stands for. There's a Croft Woodland device that is available from one of their teams down there. Look up them. And then just loads of more information stuff out there, including obviously the Crofting Federation. But just asking for training as well. If that's what we need, if we need training on certain things, let's ask for it. Let's make that demand, because it certainly seems to be the trend that I'm seeing is that people are wanting more specific training on specific topics. And obviously, I've given a broad brush approach tonight. But if you've got something specific, then contact Celia and Donna and say, I want these things. Other resources, Irish Agroforestry Forum, which is brilliant. They have money to put resources together, all very relevant, all very wet, rushy fields and things like that, exactly the same as much of us, a lot of it on the coast. And then the English Farm Woodland Forum. If you're going to grow your own trees, I look at the Autumn Seed Harvest Handbook. There's loads of resources out there. Right, I'll leave it at that. I've talked incessantly for an hour there. You've done well to have lasted so far. I'm open for questions. I might have a sip of tea as well. Let me stop.
Thank you, Phil. I think the thing is you've just got so much information to pass on. Like you say, you could go on for a lot longer. But that's amazing that you've got all that knowledge and you're able to share it. So I'll open the floor now. We've got sort of 15-20 minutes or so for questions if people have them. So if you know how to raise your hand on Zoom, please do that, or put your question in the chat. I was just looking at the ones that were sort of pre-submitted before, Phil. So I mean, you have probably touched on most of the points, but a couple of things that sort of stuck out to me was somebody said about putting protection for trees against sheep is one thing, like your own trees, but against taller grazers, cattle or horses is another. So I guess there's a bit of a balance there, isn't there, about how you kind of do that? So
it's tough, yeah. It's tough. You're dealing with strong, powerful animals with a high reach. It is difficult, and so there's no quick fix, I'm afraid, on that. I wish there was, but you've seen some of the more robust options there. That's why I'm kind of keen that is kind of supported, because I think that's the thing that we should be doing going forward. But I think that's where it does need to be supported, because we're making long-term investments into our crofts.
Okay, and I'm picking up again. So you did talk about wind in your thing, but I do love the what trees would grow well in Shetland, because I mean some folks are starting to grow trees fairly successfully in Shetland, but I think it takes a fair bit of thinking about. Have you got anything to add on that one?
Well, the Shetland Amenity Trust have been fantastic, so I would go to them. I'm not sure if they're still as active as they were in trees. They're trying to promote what trees they've got and propagate, which is really different. There's a few birch and a few hazel. I mean, just a few hazel and some aspen and things like that. But on the whole, they tend to use a mix of things from all over the place. Icelandic birch, Sitka alder, sycamore, just Swedish white beam, various things that can just tolerate it, and it works, especially to get things up and away, to get things established. So I think if it can grow in Shetland, that's a good model. I think because of their unique situation really, and the lack of local seed source, they've probably done more pioneering work, which has opened the doors, I think, for other really exposed places as well. So I'd say Shetland Amenity Trust would be the place to go to there, because some of the willows mentioned as well, they might have available for cutting. Same in Orkney as well, the hooker's willow and Alaskan felt leaf willow, as well as the native willows we've got there.
Fab. Okay. Donald, Bruce, you've got a question.
Just quickly, really. Can you explain about the shelter belt? What was the 8 and the 30? I didn't quite understand that.
Yeah, sorry, I rattled through that a bit. Yeah, so the eight rule is the height in relation to this greater impact. So say if your shelter belt is 3 meters tall, it will have an impact over 8 times that on the downward side. So 8 times 3, 24 meters would have a noticeable impact on that wind. So that's that factor of 8 in terms of height, and it's a rough rule. Obviously, depends on the exposure and angle as well. And then the 30 rule is in relation to some level of impact on the wind. So again, if it's a 3 meter high shelter belt or hedge, then over 90 meters there'll be some level of wind. If you had a little anemometer, you're just measuring, there will be slight reduction over that point. But I think once you start getting to the point where there's almost no reduction, you maybe think, well, there should be another shelter belt on the other side, or it should be compartmentalized and staged if your croft is wide enough or long enough to justify that. Ideally, a shelter belt is going to produce wind reduction over all parts of the croft if you can, depending on the wind direction.
A couple of things in the comments, Phil. So one, I guess, is just a comment from Sif saying that they're clearing heather from a planting area like they are. It seems to chip well to. They're on South US, so they don't have any other tree material to chip. But I guess anything works.
It'll break down. It'll rot down to. I suppose the woodier the material, the slower it is to break down. Things like wood chip you don't want to really integrate into the soil. You just want it on the surface, but it acts as a damp. It acts as a good moisture retainer. Which if we get our Aprils or Mays, sometimes where you get 3-4 weeks or longer with little to no rain, and that desiccating wind, it can be quite difficult for young trees. But if you've got good mulch around that, then the soil will remain moist, as long as it was moist before it went in. But generally up here, with the amount of rain we get, certainly I'm hearing it lashing. It's the Velux immediately on my right. No worries about moisture there. And it's got to have some level of feeding capability, I think, as well. And things like wood chip and heather brash or bracken brash, they're quite slow release with that. So it's the worms and the soil life that will dictate the uptake of the nutrients from that. So it's not going to be a flush of nutrients. It's going to be a slow release, and it'll something you can just add to over the time and eventually get integrated into the soil, which is what you want to be doing, really, feeding that soil as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We've got a question from Isabella. Isabella says, I was told that the areas of woodland or any trees on the croft do not qualify for basic payments. Is this correct? And if so, why not, as tree planting is being encouraged?
Well, when you look at my croft, first to map my croft in terms of eligible land, there won't be much left, unfortunately. So, scrubby bits and tree bits. I think I'm not sure about wood pasture or how that would go, how high the trees would have to be to find it. Is it the footprint of the tree? Is it the trunk at that point, if it's up and away? Or is it the drip zone area of it? I'm not sure on that. But yeah, in most cases, trees and scrub are not eligible. It's all just built on nice, easily mappable stuff. Maybe Donnie, you might have another angle on that from what you've heard on your ventures around the croftland.
No, well, I think it's probably largely historical in that basic payments is really about productive land, as in productive, as in food generation productive. So I imagine that's why they're excluded. But you're right, Isabella, tree planting's been encouraged, but I guess being encouraged for other reasons. So it may be that there's other payments come along in the future. I don't know. We don't know what a lot of the new support payments will look like beyond the basic payment replacement. So it may be that some things change there, but that certainly the basic payments we've got at the minute are largely focused around food production. So that will be why they're excluded, I think. But
maybe other grants outside of it, I suppose, isn't it? Because you've got agricultural grants from one side, but then you've got Scottish Forest. So the agroforestry grant that I mentioned there is through Scottish Forestry. So you've got one part of government. It does seem to be competitive in some ways, and of course, with the thoughts towards integrating trees, I think that's making trees productive and useful rather than just afforesting crofts and having that as a single land use. So for me, it's all about 3D thinking and layered land use within that, because it's not trees or crofting. It should be trees and crofting. It should be a valuable addition to the croft, but not the sole output, I would say.
Yeah, Isabel's followed up saying that trees can be used for tree hay. I get the point you're making, Isabella. I think it's a fair question.
That's probably a webinar for us, Donna.
That's a webinar. What, tree hay?
Tree hay again. There are resources out there. Again, Soil Association have got some, but I think there's an awful lot of folk that are unaware of just how nutritious these things are. So many of us crofters are relying on like mineral lick buckets and things like that, and bought in minerals when we've got all this wonderful resource right on our doorstep. And it doesn't have to be a big part of diet, but you give free choice to animals of what they want to eat, and you lay down branches for them, or give the branches dried or fresh, and you'll watch them gobble it up. It's not the mainstay of their diet, but it's a significant, important part of the nutrition. And I think getting that science side of things out there is important. So yeah, that's a webinar for next autumn then.
We'll add it to the list. Julia says, do you think there's demand and opportunities for more small tree nurseries in Scotland?
Yes, absolutely. But it's a question of from a business side of things. It's like, well, how much are you? I've got a small tree nursery myself, and I know the whole network of all of us are doing that. You're in a market competing against Alba Trees, Christie Elite, all these amazing Scottish tree nurseries that produce these millions of trees, but at wholesale prices. They're producing about 30 odd p a tree, which is, you can't compete with that. So for me, my native broadleaf trees don't leave the croft for less than £1. So it's often 2.5 times what is a wholesale rate. So yes, I think so. It would be nice if they were supported under CAGs, these kind of diversifications. Currently, they're not as a tree nursery. I think it'd be nice to support that, because we do want to put more trees in there. And I think I've explained the reasons why we need to do locally sourced ones, grown the right way. Yeah, I would say start small anyway. Certainly grow your own trees and scale up. And if you see my tree nursery compared to like a professional one, I'm just in fish boxes and cattle lick tubs. It's like, well, I produce thousands of trees that way, and I can go on holiday for a week in July. I'm not reliant on big polytunnels and all that kind of infrastructure that you think you need for tree nurseries. You don't. Trees are very happy outside in all weathers, all conditions. You just maybe have to adjust your expectations and the speed of doing things. But yeah, nice resilient crofting. I think yes to a tree nursery, but I think everyone should also be growing their own trees as well. Even just one fish box on top.
Do the Woodland Trust buy trees from small tree nurseries?
Yes, they do, and they really want to do more, but you have to go through some of the hoops, and rightly so, for any reasons for biosecurity. So you have to go through UK ISG, there's different rules on sourcing of trees as well. So if you're going to claim you're in zone 104, like I am on Sky, you would have to have them fulfill the criteria of forest reproductive material, that you've sourced them in the right place, and that seed collecting has been available to be inspected by people. Because you can claim 105 and you've just gone and picked berries from the Morrison's car park in Fort William, and it's just like that's not quite what we're looking for. You know, it's you're looking for the native broadleaf trees in the right habitats, in the right enclosures, and the right altitude. So all that kind of stuff is logged. So they will try and do that, but for a small tree nursery, that is a barrier to entry. I work on a retail market where I just sell locally, and so I don't put into those schemes. But I think they would pay a competitive price for it, but you're competing against those bigger operators.
Another question in the chat from Geraint says, can you put mulch directly on top of a grass sward, or do you need to remove the grass first?
Depends what the mulch is. I would say just go straight for it. Ideally, it's going to be thick enough that it's going to smother it. If it's coming through, you should be able to weed through. What you don't want to do is mulch right up to the trunk. I should have put that in the bit. So ideally it's a donut. So it's really shallow around the trunk itself. Otherwise, it can cause it to either root out or just get fungal disease, because that planting line on the trunk is quite important. And so if you just pile up essentially mulch against it, it's not ideal. But when I'm putting wood chip down, I'll put it down 3-4 inches deep. And that's fine. It's absolutely okay. It's just creating soil-like conditions. It's not too deep. As long as the ground's moist underneath when it first went in, it can be a barrier to rain, because showers of rain will not get through thick mulch. So if the ground's damp, it will stay damp for most of the summer under a good mulch, regardless of that. So it gives them a real advantage, and some species will do fine. And I suppose it depends on the grass as well. Yeah, it would vary. You can maybe put a layer of cardboard down underneath it, for example. That's an easy way of mitigating as well. I think we've all got access to some like unstained, uninked cardboard that you could just stick down as a ring around it first, then stick the mulch on top. That'll definitely work then. Newspaper, maybe.
And I guess tied into that, Phil, one of the pre-submitted questions was about how important is weeding around the base, and what's the sort of quickest and most effective way to do that. Because we keep talking about giving the trees enough space to get up and away, but
it depends on the scale again. It's like for a Croft scale, that's what I wanted to kind of highlight tonight. Is like if we're doing 300s, 400s, that's hand weeding and checking really. It's quite a lot of work on your hands and knees at various times, but I think it's worth it. And I said good mulch would have mitigated a lot of that. You just go around and then check the trees. You should be checking them anyway, especially if there's guards and things on there, to make sure they're not getting rubbed, or if they've not been pinned. Sometimes they get pinned under different bits in strong wind, or it could have leant over. So for me, it's just a pair of gardening gloves and just going round, and it's, well, realistically, with ripping of grass, it's like 15 seconds per tree, for a few times on a visit. So it's quite a bit of work, but it's something that could be done maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the summer. It would make a world of difference for that. Maybe do some controls to see what it's like, but grass in particular, it will just outcompete it. There's very few things that will puncture through.
Mhm. So get the gloves out and get on get on with it. Is it okay to put vole guards around bushy trees like holly?
Yes, I mean, it depends on the size that they come in at. Holly is quite a sensitive species as it is, but if you can get enough round the trunk, you maybe have to do a little bit of pruning for that. So if they're coming in at, say, 25 centimeters or so, and the vole guard's coming in at 15, then you maybe have to get over the top. But it'll grow quite quickly through that. Yeah, I would say so. And it should bush out quite nicely from that. I've not had much of an issue with voles on holly, but it is a very palatable species for a lot of things. Yeah, it will not do well in a tube, in the bigger tubes and things like their form as it is. So it's best to kind of just get them out and about. I think a vole guard fine.
As we've touched on, there is a whole load of more detailed things I guess you could go into, and that sort of does take us to the I guess where we're going from here. So firstly, Phil, let me thank you very much for that tonight. That's, I'm sure, got a lot of people thinking about how they're going to go about this or what they want to do, and that's the whole idea. So that's fabulous. In terms of what the SCF are doing with the webinars, as I said, this is the last one in a series of what has been 6. That have been really popular, really well attended, and we really appreciate everybody giving up their evenings to come along to these. So we've been putting a lot of thought into what happens next, and me and Celia have been busy cooking up. We think we know what the next sort of series of webinars is going to be, and I guess we're going to call it Crofting Basics. There you go. I'll announce that to you guys tonight. That's not out publicly yet. Where we are going to go back to basics, because one thing that's come through loud and clear from both the in-person sessions and some of these online ones is there's a lot of people just looking for any and every bit of information about coming into crofting and what you need to know to get started, and what you need to know if you maybe think about doing something new. So we're going to do some focused around that, but we'd like to continue building a program of online webinars beyond that too. So I mean, Phil mentioned it earlier, if there is a topic that you really want to see us cover, then please do let us know, and we're going to continue to build these, because the whole idea is there's no point us putting these on if we're not covering the things that people want us to cover. So if you tell us what you want us to cover, then we will do our best to provide that. So please do get in touch with the office or Celia or myself, and pass on any ideas that you have. But that would be amazing. So keep your eyes peeled on our socials and whatnot for the next set coming up soon. And other than that, it just remains me to thank you all again for coming along tonight, and hopefully we will see you either virtually or in real life again soon. But yeah, thank you very much, guys.